expected that she and John Paul, who she called Hans, were going to depart sometime in December of 2000. It's 20 years ago almost. So sometime in February or late February, March of 2001, I thought Colleen should have gotten in touch with me by now. So I got a little concerned, and I called her son, Michael, to find out what he knew about that. And Michael told me that he was really frightened.
Hi, welcome to the podcast, Chalice Paul Disappeared, The True Story. Today we have a special guest. His name is Paul Kully, and Paul was a very dear friend of the family and former boyfriend of Colleen Wood, who went missing approximately in the end of 2000, beginning of 2001 in Florida. She was last seen with John Paul Sr. There's an active investigation going on at Fort Lauderdale Police Department. The former detective who was handling this case has since retired. His name is Detective Mark Shotwell. But I had the pleasure of getting other names today from Paul, who I could do a follow-up with because I have gotten nowhere with Fort Lauderdale Police Department to tell me who the new point person is for this cold case. So, I want to introduce you to Paul Kully. He's a retired gentleman now, and I want him to go into background as far as, who he is and what he used to do for a living. Hi, Paul. How you doing?
I'm well, Lisa. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for participating, and I'm so glad I was able to bring you in to be a spokesperson for Colleen. It appears that her son has been very busy in the medical field with the COVID-19 situation going on right now. So maybe that'll change down the road and we can add him in as an interview. But I really appreciate you coming forward with the information. And all the documents that you sent me today are very interesting. I'm going to go through them all a little more carefully, but I'm glad that I got your memory juices going here in regards to what happened back then. So why don't you just explain a little bit about yourself, what you used to do for a living, and your relationship with Colleen.
I sold airplanes my entire career and worked in the last 25 years for Falcon Jet, selling corporate jets. While I was doing that, I purchased a sailboat back in 1992, and sometime just prior to that, I had started seeing Colleen. She expressed an interest in wanting to learn to sail, and she and another couple went with me up to Harbor Springs, Michigan, when this boat was ready to bring it back to Lake Erie in Cleveland. So she was just a wonderful woman. You don't. It was a tough week getting the boat ready. There were some issues that had to be corrected on it before I was going to take delivery of it. So we were a few days late leaving, and we left on a really windy, cold day for her first sail with me, and I believe it was the first sail of her life. In spite of the fact it was August, it was very cold, and she was a trooper. Loved to sail, funny, fun-loving, outgoing, and after the first 12 or 18 hours, I found out the foul weather gear that I had given her to use was leaking, and it was cold water and a cold day. I had good foul weather gear, and I was cold, and here she'd been wet the whole time, didn't say a word about it, didn't get seasick. When it calmed down a bit, we let her do some sailing, and she was just a natural teacher about what you do to sail, and she picked it right up. So, and then later on in that, just to give you an idea of her demeanor, I guess, her temper, later on in that trip, we got down into Lake Erie. We came Lake Michigan to Lake Huron, and then Lake St. Clair, and then Lake Erie. And when we were in Lake Erie, we spent the first night, we stopped in South Bass Island, or Put in Bay. That had some seafood there. She got salmonella, and the other couple that was with us, one of their in-laws was in critical condition in the hospital, so they had to leave the boat, and we were going to bring it back the rest of the way ourselves. Well, that night she had a terrible case of salmonella and diarrhea, throwing up, etc., etc. And finally, I took her on shore in the dinghy to EMS in the middle of the night, and they couldn't help her. They didn't have the ability there, but they did round up a water taxi to take us over to the mainland and put her in a hospital, where they gave her IVs for about, I don't know, close to 24 hours. And we brought her back to the boat, and she was ready to go again. We sailed back. We spent some more time in Put in Bay, and then came back to Cleveland, and she never complained. The other thing about Colleen, I don't remember ever hearing an unkind word out of her mouth. And that was 92, and I saw her up until, I think the last time we went sailing was in the spring of 2000. So after she'd already met John Paul, some of us chartered two boats down in St. Martin. We went over to St. Bart's and so forth. And, again, big seas and big waves and big winds, and she just ate it up. So that whole time, we did a lot of sailing, and she never got seasick, never fearful, just a wonderful sailor.
Well, that's interesting that she had very little background when she first, well, none whatsoever when she first went out with you in, the lakes of Michigan, which are like an ocean. I've seen them myself. I mean, they've got waves and tides and all that stuff, just like the ocean does. So you used to date her, and you said that you found out some interesting information when you decided you wanted to dedicate a bench for her was that at her high school?
Oh, no, the bench is very recent.
Oh, okay.
That was just a place that I happened to walk, and they put out memorial benches, so I thought maybe it was... Let's see, it's recent, but it is Springfield, where she was I think she was a cheerleader and the homecoming queen there. And I found out this after she's disappeared. She just wasn't boastful about any of her life. In any event, since she was the homecoming queen in Springfield, which is a suburb of Akron, I just thought she deserved a bench over there, something in her memory. So we took care of that.
Well, that's very kind of you to do. And just for the record, I know that there's been a lot of press and blog pages saying that she was from Dayton, and she's originally from Akron, or outside Akron, Ohio. Is that correct?
Yes, I don't know where Dayton entered the picture at, but so far as I know, I don't know that she ever spent one day in Dayton, Ohio.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just a little tidbit of facts there that we can add to this podcast. So have you, tell me the process of when you first suspected something happened to Colleen. You guys had an agreement on communications before she took off for this trip, or how did she explain John Paul to you? And was he going by the name John Paul or a different name?
Well, when we were sailing in the spring of 2000, I hadn't been dating her or sailing with her, but I wanted to. There were 5 other couples that were renting 2 boats down there after a sales meeting, and I wanted somebody to go with me, and so I called her, and we kept in touch. She knew passionate I was about sailing, and at some point I thought I might get a boat and live aboard and do long-term, long-range, long-distance cruising. So I think she just wanted to share with me. She wanted somebody that could appreciate what she was about to get to do. So periodically she would tell me, that she decided to do it. This was over the phone. And then she said she decided to sell her condo, and then I think she called after she sold her condo. And again, we sailed that spring, so maybe 9 months before she went missing. I knew that and we stayed in touch as they were getting ready for departure. I might hear from her every 2 months or so, but she told me when they were approximately when they were going to leave, and I just intuitively knew there was no way she would take that kind of a trip and not stay in touch and send me photos and brag a little bit about what she got to do, and I'm still working, so I was looking forward to that. So anyway, it was probably March. I expected that she and John Paul, who she called Hans, were going to depart sometime in December of 2000. I think I've got the years right here. It's 20 years ago almost. So in any event, sometime probably in about February or late February, March of 2001, I thought Colleen should have gotten in touch with me by now. So I got a little concerned, and I called her son, Michael, to find out what he knew about that. And Michael told me that he was really frightened. They hadn't heard anything. They were expecting some Christmas presents. They'd agreed that she would stay in touch, and she had not sent a letter or a phone call or anything, no communication. And the Christmas presents that she told Michael she had already purchased never showed up. And these were presents for her grandchildren that she thought more than the world of. Well, when Michael told me that, I was just, very saddened, and thought, well, I'll try to dig a little more. And he mentioned then John Paul, and so I had that, and somehow or another, I remember it was Easter Sunday. I didn't have a computer at home, so I went over to my office in the afternoon and just started scouring the internet looking for some way to get in touch with John Paul Sr. And I somehow connected Tanya Paul, who lived in Indiana, to John Paul Sr. and called her with a phone number I found on the internet. She answered the phone, and I explained that I was calling on behalf of Michael Tandridge, Colleen's son, and we were expecting to hear from her. We knew she had gone sailing with Tanya Paul's father. And this is when I really got concerned. She had a reaction that was beyond, oh no. There was a terrible trepidation in her voice after I told her that Colleen was missing. And she told me at that point that her father told her, John Paul Sr. told her, that he and Colleen had had a disagreement over another woman that he used to date. Apparently, Colleen was off the boat and called John Paul's cell phone, and this other woman answered his phone. That's the story he told Tanya. But she was really worried and very determined to be as helpful as she could be. At least that was my impression. So I explained I thought that it'd be best if she talked to Michael with it, and she said, yes, have him call me. So after that, I had no further contact with her, but she had quite a bit of contact with Michael Tandridge, Colleen's son.
Did she share anything in detail with Michael on the phone conversations that you know of?
I think, if I recall, and this really does go back, that she told Michael she didn't have a phone number for her father, but he called her with some regularity, and that she would explain to her father that Michael wanted to talk to her. And then, as I recall, that did occur. She got a call from her dad, and eventually her dad called Michael Tandridge. And if I recall it correctly again, he told Michael a little bit different story about Colleen's evacuating the boat. I forget what it was, but I know it was different. And then when the police talked to him later, he had another story for the police. So that was an area of concern, that he had three different versions of Colleen the last time he saw Colleen.
Well, definitely a pattern of behavior there that I'm finding out now recently in regards to Chalice's disappearance as well. So usually tiger stripes don't change. Their behavior stays pretty much consistent, whether it be positive or negative. I found that's just human nature. But so when you realized you got a reaction from his daughter, who's now deceased, she died of Huntington's disease. I just need to put that out there. She communicated with Michael, who was the only family member she was talking to, or it sounded like Michael was the only point person involved in this investigation, from him appearing on a couple of network television show, and then a cable-based television show as well in regards to Colleen Wood. But he has a brother who's in the service, I believe, but there was nobody else that got involved. What about her sisters and brothers? You just told me in your notes that you discovered that she had other family members. She had two brothers and a sister, correct?
I did not, to my best of my memory, I never talked to any of her brothers or sisters. I did meet her mother, knew and talked to her after Colleen's disappearance, and I did talk to Todd, her other son, Michael's brother, on one or more occasions about this, but he didn't have any information. He just wanted questions answered.
So, is her parents still alive?
No, they're deceased.
And but the mother was alive when she went missing.
Yes.
Wow. So, how long ago did she pass away?
I don't remember.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So she left an extended family behind. She didn't her Christmas gifts for the kids, so she was bonded with her grandchildren. They never arrived. That was a red flag. But how come nobody thought that there was something wrong right after the holidays? She wasn't declared missing until, May of 2001. Is there an explanation for that?
My memory of this is a little sketchy, but as I recall when talking to Michael after the first time I called him, I think at that point, my first communication with Michael, he had already contacted the Green Cove Springs Police Department in Florida, and that was the last mailing address he had for Colleen. It was never really a physical residence. It was simply a mail forwarding company that resided in Green Cove Springs. So,
and you and I, in conversation before this interview, I put two and two together, and actually John Paul Sr. did have a relationship with some people from that town. And since the gentleman has passed away, I understand from natural causes. I don't have 100% confirmation, but I do have a it's an obituary on the internet. Just gives me a date, but there was definitely a connection, and actually this gentleman's son was involved with John Paul Jr. in a drug smuggling operation that had been going on in Louisiana, and that's public record. That's actually on newspaper articles. So that was interesting what you said, because I didn't realize that there was places that you could use a mail center being out in the middle of the ocean. And this town had how many people? 5,000 people in that little town? You know,
roughly, yes.
So why would that town be the mail center of all places that you could have mail? I would think if you left from Fort Lauderdale, you could find a mail center that does this sort of thing in Fort Lauderdale, where it is a haven for sailors and yachts and yacht charters, etc. I would think that if it would have kept it close to home, it would have made more sense. But that's not my expertise. I don't understand that.
I don't either. But further to your original question about the police department, so by the time I spoke with Michael, he'd already been in contact with Green Cove Springs, and they suggested, if I remember, to contact the Coast Guard. He'd done that, but then immediately after I spoke with Tanya, he got in touch with the Fort Lauderdale Police Department, I believe, for the first time. And that's when the case started getting some traction.
And what I found very interesting, because of my research and my wanting to get an open, active investigation on Chalice, because she's never been officially investigated, and it's going on 40 years now. So, and that's very, very disturbing, and that's probably one of the main reasons why I'm doing this podcast, just to get it out there. So law enforcement, if anybody's listening, retired, detective, whatever, wants to get involved, because there are detectives out there who have retired and, they take an active interest in cold cases. And it seems to be a division that gets ignored, especially with the ongoing problem with terrorism. And of course, now we've got, all sorts of issues going on now in our country alone, let alone the world. But, it's just a shame that nothing has come forward, even with all my research that I've been able to collect over the years, and valid facts that I've uncovered through my, internet-based research and interviews I've made, trips I've made, law enforcement I've spoken to, etc. So, but Homicide Division took over this case immediately. Why did they do that? I mean, usually when you have a missing person case, it gets into, a file, and then they hope that, they can collect DNA from a family member, which I know now. It's called mitochondrial DNA, where they collect it from a family member because it gets transferred from mother to child. It doesn't even matter if the father is a different father. And then it gets run through CODIS, through FBI database, and if they find a Jane Doe or one bone and they match it, then it's an automatic investigation and considered a person of interest or, suspicious. But Detective Mark Shotwell was the lead detective, and now I see there's other two detectives that were involved in that. Why did Michael or the family ever explain why Homicide got involved immediately on this?
I don't know how long it took to go from missing persons to homicide, but Michael was very, very concerned. He finally convinced them that Colleen was not a flighty, fickle woman, that she was, she left a good job. She wanted to go sailing. She was a communicator. She stayed in touch with her son. She said that she'd already purchased these Christmas presents and told Michael what they were, I believe, and that they were going to be mailed the next day. Michael told the police about, Colleen missing a Christmas party at her former employer down there in Lighthouse Point Marina in Florida. There are too many serious commitments from a serious woman to be taken lightly, and she would not just disappear for 90 days or so. And I think shortly after they started looking into it, Michael provided them with some of her credit card information. They found out that a lot of ATM withdrawals were being made, had been made, after she last spoke with anybody. I think it was December 15th was the last time anybody that we could find spoke with Colleen, around the 15th.
Okay, and that's 2001, obviously.
No, that would have been...
2000. Okay.
December 15th.
December,
2000.
okay. 2000, correct. Let me correct that.
And Easter of 2001 is when I spoke with Tanya and Paul.
Okay.
And that's when things really picked up. I think Michael was no longer just, waiting for the Coast Guard or Green Cove Springs or somebody to... And shortly thereafter, I remember the police department, the detectives invited Michael to try to get the FBI or the Justice Department involved. They wanted as much help as they could get on this case.
So you're saying Fort Lauderdale PD was honoring the federal government to get involved in this?
They said they would not object to some help, and I don't know the protocol, but what Michael told me that they invited him to speak with the FBI about this. I think he tried to get them involved, and that didn't work either. It was just no body, no witness, and I remember Detective Shotwell telling me the number of women that were MIA, or missing, not MIA, but missing in Florida. It just flabbergasted me. It's not that unusual, unfortunately.
Well, especially down Key West is like the end of the world, they call it. You've got a tremendous amount of people that are been involved in crime, and they picture that as, their refuge, a place to hide. It's warm, it's tropical, there's tons of tourists, you can, hide in the woodwork down there, basically. It's been known for that for many, many years, that it's a place where a lot of criminals go and hang out, and people on the lam especially. But, Florida in general, we have a lot of transit people here, just like any islands, per se. It's the same thing. But, so it was her boss who called her. And I had spoken and met with Maureen personally, because I live here and I don't live too far from, the Lighthouse Point Marina. I know it well. And they have a little restaurant there that they actually allow dogs there. Which is nice, and a lot of people with dogs go there and eat outside on the water. It's the locals know about it, not the tourists don't know about it too much. But she made a phone call to Colleen. She was with John Paul in Key West, and she was supposed to come to the company Christmas party, and she said that she would, but she was down, quote unquote, in Key West partying with Hans. I guess she called him Hans as well. So, strangely enough, this is what John Paul Sr. told me personally over the phone when I asked him what happened to Chalice. I was in Atlanta doing research for the first time. I think it was in 1982. Of course, I had somebody locally following up in attempts to get the FBI involved. right after her disappearance, but they weren't a family member. Family didn't have access to, or they weren't willing to come forward at the time or help. There was a lot of confusion going on and a lot of, stories going around of who said what and where she was, and she wasn't really, dead, as according to them, and that, she was just off partying, having a good time. I'm talking about Chalice for this. But, he told me that he left her in Key West, and he tried to create an alibi, saying that, she was talking about some treasure hunters. You know anything about that, Lisa? And I said, well, Chalice knew I was dating a guy who was a boat captain, who was good friends with Jimmy Buffett, and had a ground sweeper. It was a Coast Guard ground sweeper, or mine sweeper, I guess they call it. And they were seeking refuge in the Caribbean. They were like Jacques Cousteau. And so I thought, well, is that possible? She was going to be in Bird's movie. The last time I spoke to her, she was in Atlanta, and she was going down to meet John Paul. So we know for a fact that she took that flight to meet him down there. And now he created an alibi saying he left her in Key West. So anyways, that is coincidental, or is it where both these women's body lay off the coast of the Florida Keys, which I tend to believe is where their final resting spot was, based on what Maureen said. I said, well, there's definitely a pattern of behavior here, and it's so easy. He was a sailor, and he used, the ocean, and and I know, when you go out in the ocean and you're all by yourself with one person, and they have the capability of knocking you out and putting an anchor on you and throwing you overboard, who's going to find you, right? And didn't that get uncovered in their investigation, that they found things for the boat that was purchased before their supposed trip together?
I don't recall.
No? Okay. I remember a conversation with somebody who claimed that he purchased more than one anchor for the boat, which I don't know anything about sailing. Is that unusual to have more than one anchor on the boat?
No, it's, a good cruising boat would have at least two on the bow and perhaps another one in a locker somewhere.
Right, okay. So that's not unusual to have. So, yeah, there's a lot of conspiracy theories that have gone around as far as where Chalice was last seen alive, and unfortunately I didn't get either Georgia or Florida law enforcement to actively take the case even years later as a cold case investigation. So you came to Florida after you found out she was missing, correct?
Yes.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, what your experience when you came down?
Well, I got to know Detective Shotwell over the phone. He was as part of his investigation, and so I asked him about if a reward would help, and he said he thought it would. So anyway, we agreed to post a reward with their group down there. I forget what it was called, but it was, in any event, that led to a relationship with him. We kind of hit it off talking over the phone. It was Crime Stoppers who put, they match part of the reward.
And
so I wanted to go down there. I don't remember if I was going down on business, or I don't remember how it happened, but in any event, I got to spend the better part of a day with Detective Shotwell. We talked about the case. He asked me if I'd like to see some of the sites there that were connected to the case, and I told him I would. So he took me to the marina where the boat was docked for a good part of December, and pointed out the bar across the way that he'd been talking to people in there because they spent some time in there. And then he took me to, I think it was off of the 17th Street Causeway there, I forget the name of the road, on the water. they had rented, or Hans had rented an apartment that had a dock in front of it, and that's where they were working on this sailboat.
I believe that was off Las Olas.
Las Olas, okay.
Yeah, Las Olas 17th Street Causeway is another thoroughfare to get over to A1A. But Las Olas Boulevard is where all the restaurants and shops downtown, and then it goes into a residential area, and they have finger canals on both sides, and then you get down to A1A. And if I recall, that's where his residence was down on one of those side streets. And according to your notes, that verifies that. But go ahead. So you came down and you did a tour with Detective Shotwell.
Right. We just talked about the case, and I think he was anxious to get a better sense of Colleen, and he was dedicated to solving this as best I could tell. He was, I admired what he was doing. We talked frequently. Things would turn up here and there, little rumors, and it just, I don't know. I thought the case was going to be solved, actually. But again, I think he also told me at one point, he said, they had never had a successful homicide prosecution in Florida without a body or a witness. And that he was working closely with the prosecutor. And at one point, I remember he told me, because it's in the notes here, that the prosecutor said, "You've got 30% of what we need for a conviction, and I can't take it to prosecution without at least a 50% probability of success."
So how come he didn't form his own website or page for information? I know that other people that have blog pages up there have included him in. If you have any information, contact, the Fort Lauderdale Police Department and put a phone number up there. But with all the recognition that Colleen got from television, reenactment scenes, ID Network, the Dark Voyage, the Colleen Wood story that you can still, purchase, I think, for $1 on YouTube. And they did reenactment scenes just like America's Most Wanted. By the way, America's Most Wanted would not cover Chalice's story. I've gotten conflicting reports from people who said that they saw her on there. I happen to know John Walsh, and I've worked with him on other cases for reenactment scenes and offered up locations. She was never, there was some interest with their producers, but once again, they didn't have enough information to prove that there was actual foul play. She's circumstantial to Colleen Wood's case. And I think that I have accumulated enough information that is leading towards John Paul Sr. being the number one, suspect in her disappearance. And of course, there's other family members that are just too fearful to come forward. They know. There's been a lot of burying, the bones, more or less, and the hidden skeletons in the closet. Photos were thrown out from her, I understand. Her personal belongings were given away to his children, from what I understand. And, she was literally a ghost. And, of course, her family didn't have the resources, means, or money to do what I've been doing all these years. And, they have a bit of fear, too. It's amazing that this man, who is now 81 years old, living in a foreign country, who would never step foot in the state of Florida again because we have the death penalty, and if they do pin him on murder, he could be facing that, especially more than one count. But it's amazing that so many people have knowledge and information. Even the racing circuit people don't want to talk about John Paul. I don't know if that's just the good old boys club or just out of sheer fear. It's interesting enough. So now that you knew there was an active investigation, the feds didn't want to get involved. Do you remember the name of the prosecutor who Shotwell was working with?
No, he didn't. I didn't have that in the notes that I just saw this morning. He just said the prosecutor that he was dealing with.
So,
the prosecutor was very interested in the case as well. I know they would have liked to.
Well, this podcast could shed some new light on this entire investigation based on the fact that nothing has been done. And it's very frustrating to not get law enforcement to do their job and to follow through with it. I realize that they have other cases they have to deal with, and it's a known fact that if family does not get behind them and pester the hell out of them to do their job, they put it on the back burner. And this seems to be the case in most crimes that need to be investigated, that you need to have some stimulation there to get them to move and to have them take an active interest in this.
I can't tell you the time frame, but Michael and I were both aware of that, and both of us stayed in contact with Detective Shotwell. And at one point, and I'm sure this was well over a year after this began, and it might have been 2 or 3 years, I just don't remember, the detective said, Paul, this file is on the top of my desk and has been there since I opened the file. So it's something that I know was near to his heart.
Well, if it's near to his heart, how come he doesn't respond to my texts?
That I can't answer.
Okay. I bombed him with a lot of information when I first found out about Colleen Wood gone missing, and for whatever reason, he maybe thinks I'm a wannabe, or, I'm just a nut job or what, but I am the real deal, and nobody has gotten as far as I have on one individual. Colleen was already under an investigation. It was not my place to investigate her case. She's already in active investigation. But for whatever I was collecting on Chalice should be taken serious for the investigation of Colleen Wood. That's just a given. I mean, they both were connected to one man, and that man also did attempt to kill another man. That is documented. He served time for it. That was Stephen Carson. And now I've heard other individuals who have disappeared and suspected that he was, the person responsible for that. Where that investigation went, I have no idea. I don't even think that anybody did anything about it. So it's surprising that somebody could still be on this earth and still living as a functioning human being and having a life and a new family and a business and living, the lap of luxury from money that was dirty money, blood money, and how the feds even screwed up after, he got captured, and how come they didn't stay on top of, the assets. He still had a house that he transferred into his wife's name, his former wife's name. He had cars that were stashed. They all came out the minute he got out. He was seen at a racetrack with, $150,000 Porsche. He left the state of Florida. He violated parole right there. People saw him. He was bold. He didn't care. He knew he wasn't going to stick around and get a 9-to-5 job. He was going to do what he had to do to get the hell out. So, I hate to say it, but Colleen was collateral damage in his master plan, and I just hope to God that, there's some closure with the family and that we all have closure as to what the truth and what really happened. And where do you think it's going to go from here, Paul? Do you think, the family's going to lose interest? It's been, like you said, 19 years. Chalice has been 40 years. There's other people in between that those families might not even realize there's a connection with him. One gentleman who allegedly disappeared from his hands, his daughter reached out to me. She was a baby when he disappeared. Launching Chalice Poll on the internet was the best thing I ever did. But Colleen, how come nobody built a page for her, or even a missing person page on Facebook or a website? And Fort Lauderdale PD, isn't creating their own page, knowing that this is a high-profile case for them now. That's beyond me. So I'm going to let you do the closure on this of what your feelings are and how you feel about John Paul and, what's your take on it and where you think this is going to go.
Well, obviously I don't know where it will go. I would hope that at some point he'll be questioned on U.S. soil and have to answer some of these questions. But I kind of doubt that. He's been pretty smart at evading police for 19 years now, almost 20 years, so I don't suspect he's going to lighten up any. I think Michael, I have a great, just going back through this file myself, I've got about a 1-inch thick file that I haven't looked at for probably years. It brings up a lot of just remorse, sadness, and I know I could tell when I was talking to Michael frequently that this was tearing his heart out to deal with this. So I actually don't think I don't expect Michael to do anything more. As far as the web page and so forth, I don't know if we even had Facebook back in 2000 or 2001. I'm looking at this missing persons poster. This is the Fort Lauderdale Police Department. Their logo is on it, and I believe somehow or another they're very integral to this Crime Stoppers. It was Mark Shotwell that suggested this is how I should go about posting a reward. So
how come I have never seen that on a search engine on the internet? If you could send that to me, I will send it and add it to chalicepaul.com in the links page, which,
Well, to be accurate, though, this was I had to put the money up front. And after about, I don't know, maybe 5 years, I told them I'd just take the money back because I didn't expect that it was going to do anything at this late point, at this time.
So you need to have one contributor or multiple contributors to put up a reward, and you did that yourself. What about the family members? Did they contribute any funds for that, or was that just you?
I think they asked me to it was kind of like that bench, I'm retired and I'm okay financially, so I just said I'll take care of it.
Well, they have a thing called GoFundMe now, which I don't know if this applies to it, and I've never done that for Chalice. I'm not in a position to be able to put up reward money, but who's to say? Maybe there's an organization out there once they hear about this podcast and decide that it's got to end now, so let's give them a motivating factor. Even Stephen Carson heard a rumor that there was $1 million bounty on John Paul Sr.'s head. Can you imagine if there was $1 million on his head? He would be right here in a holding cell in Fort Lauderdale, facing a trial if that was the case. It's amazing how people move when there's money involved. But where do you think he is right now?
The last I heard, he was somewhere around Phuket, someplace that didn't have an extradition arrangement with the U.S.
And that's in Thailand, obviously. And is that for the entire country or just one part of Thailand?
I don't know. As I recall, that was something Detective Shotwell mentioned to me, that they knew where he was. They actually got a computer off the boat from another woman who, a long story, when that America's Most Wanted.
No, it was Unsolved Mysteries, not America's Most Wanted.
Unsolved Mysteries, okay.
Yeah.
When that was running, somebody in that part of the world videotaped it on their boat, and gave it to a woman who was living on John Paul's boat in the same harbor. And she grabbed the computer off the boat that people later thought might be Colleen's, shipped it back to Fort Lauderdale Police Department, but they wouldn't, because of the way it was acquired, they couldn't open the computer and look for evidence in it. This was all per Michael, and he still wanted the computer. That's the kind of work he does. He's an IT guy. If it is Colleen's computer, he could have readily got into the hard drive and determined that. But
so where's the laptop now? Sitting in an evidence locker?
Well, this is probably 7, 8, 10 years ago it was. I haven't heard anything about it since then.
I think it was longer than that. I think that was, from what I recall, his pattern of travel. When he fled from where his boat was dry docked, which was in Isla Morada in the Florida Keys. And that's when Detective Shotwell and the other detective went down to question him and didn't do background enough to find out he was on parole violation. That would have given grounds to bring him up to their jurisdiction. I mean, it's strange enough, they drove down there to Isla Morada, which is sheriff's jurisdiction in Monroe County. But they let him go, and he knew that, the crap was going to hit the fan, so he lowered the boat and took off. Where do you think the first place he went? I'm going to have you tell me, and then I'll tell you what I heard. Where do you think he took off first?
I have not a clue.
Really? Wow. Well, I heard he went to Jamaica, and then from there he sailed over to the South Pacific, but he was in New Zealand and Australia prior to landing in Fiji Islands, where this reenactment scene you were referring to, where the girl runs off the boat with the laptop. Another couple who saw Unsolved Mysteries, they're an American couple on an American boat, recognized the name of the boat, told the girl, she contacted Detective Mark Shotwell. He says, you better leave or you're going to be, shark bait, basically. And I don't know where that went from there, but he then left and sailed back to Europe. He was in Spain, and then he went to Italy. And actually, you told me about the boat was up for sale in a sailing magazine in Italy. Do you recall that?
I do. And as soon as I saw that, I contacted Detective Shotwell and told him that ad was running. I think at that point they already knew he was in that general vicinity, but they didn't know where.
And he changed the name of the boat. He was in Thailand during the tsunami, I understand. Maybe not directly in Phuket, but somewhere else, maybe in Thailand. And also, he was in England at one point or another. And I think that he had more than one passport. Of course, that's difficult these days with Homeland Security and with COVID-19 going on all over the world, and, everything's on lockdown in certain countries. I think he's back in Thailand, from what I understand. He's there and he's running a dive shop, and he remarried another woman who's Thai descent. That's the last I heard. And that's where he could be traveling freely in Europe, who knows, but do you think that they'll ever be able to bring him back to stand trial in Florida?
I really don't. I was hopeful for a long time, but I'll be very pleasantly surprised.
Well, I have faith and I have hope that in our lifetime maybe this could happen, unless he passes away and none of us know about it. That's always a possibility, too. But I appreciate you talking to me. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap this up?
Well, I'd just love to thank you for all that you're doing, Lisa. You dig really, really, really deep. I think I shared with you, if I was ever looking to solve a case, I would hire you to try to help me for sure. And so I applaud what you're doing. I hope it bears fruit.
appreciate it. And, it's called love. You have love for somebody, and you get elected. I believe that when people pass over and they haven't settled, their soul and spirit hasn't settled, I think they elect somebody to carry the torch. And I really feel that Chalice gave that torch to me to do something. And there was a big stretch in my life that I just blessed it and let it go. But then when I found out about Colleen, I said, no, I've got to step up to the plate because, this is just going to continue. This behavior is going to continue. And, I'm a victim's advocate. So I believe that if you have the ability and will to do something, that you need to come forward and do something. So we will keep you posted as to, my research, my findings, and I'm going to look over all your documents you sent me. I really appreciate it, and we'll stay in touch.
Okay, Lisa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and have a lovely dinner tonight. I know you have dinner plans tonight.
Okay.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.